Hi, today I'm going to be talking about a smarter way to B2B funnel tracking. Was my presentation at MOps-Apalooza 2024. Um, about me, I'm Todd Sprinkle, the principal solution architect at Sponge.io. I've been in marketing ops for 14 years now, Salesforce certified admin, familiar with all the maps. Um, so just to set the stage a little bit, again, we're going to be talking about B2B funnel tracking. First, we're going to start with, what is the funnel? Is it still relevant? How do I choose what the best model is? Um, the kind of which model you go with is sort of up to you and what makes sense for the business. But I think it's important that you need to be tracking something to get an idea of your performance. It's worth systematizing and measuring this. Otherwise, you're just going to be kind of practicing divination with no real idea of um, what's actually going on in your business. So, quote that kind of resonates for me on this topic is all models are wrong, but some are useful. The point here is there's a million different kinds of models out there, from the sort of traditional marketing funnel of awareness, consideration, conversion, loyalty, whatever, to flywheels, the serious decision demand waterfall. There are sort of a demand unit waterfall update. There are various bow tie models. There are a bunch out there. None of these are going to be perfect. As we know, like, consumers don't really follow the model you choose exactly. And an important distinction here is it's not necessarily about what the buyer journey is like, but the model here is supposed to be a representation of your go-to-market process from marketing, sales to customer success. Um, so regardless of whichever model you choose, you're going to get questions like, how many XYZs did we produce last month? What is the conversion rate from our MQLs to SALs? What sort of the next logical question of that is, where are those coming from? So what campaign drove the most MQLs, opportunities, whatever? Um, you may also get questions like, how quickly on average are we onboarding our customers? So you need some sort of way to measure that in a systematic way. Um, Sort of similar to attribution, which I'm going to touch on a little bit as part of this presentation. It's not really about assigning credit or blame, but gathering enough information in order to make better decisions. So how can we choose which campaigns to invest in, what investments to personnel, and what should we be sending over to sales? Without sort of structure in this place, in addition to not being able to measure and improve your own processes, this can also lead to a poor buyer experience because they may be requesting demos and you don't have a firm process for handing that over from marketing to sales, and then that gets kind of lost in the shuffle potentially. So it's very important to have this, well defined and tracked well. So the first step, once you've sort of roughly figured out what kind of a model you're going to go with, is defining your stages. Um, this is the hardest part, right? But this is definitely not just a marketing discussion. You want to get the whole business involved: sales, customer success. Um, some of the reporting questions that you want to be able to answer are going to drive some of the logic of how do I define which stages. For example, if you are getting asked all the time, how many meetings did we book? If you're not tracking meetings, then you can't really answer that question. So I think of this as the way to lay a solid foundation upon which you can build, the rest of your business. Um, Part of that foundation might be, firming up your campaign structure, or getting your UTM process firmed up, or explicitly defining your handoffs from marketing to sales, or BDRs to AEs, or from the AE to customer success post sale. Um, you want to think about, like, what are the milestones along the selling process, and how can we define those explicitly from a data perspective and process perspective. So you want to take your time here and cover all the edge cases, because um, this is the foundation that you're going to lay everything on top of. As part of this, you're probably going to get, some natural tension between the interested parties of, how do we define all of these stages. Marketers tend to want to call lots of things MQLs because then it looks like they're doing a great job. Um, and I see sometimes a lot of hot takes out there of like, oh, is the MQL dead? And I think that's a little bit nonsense, right? The I think what is dead is the idea of the MQL as a goal in and of itself. However, you need some sort of leading indicator, prior to opportunities in pipeline. Otherwise, like, how can we track how we're tracking towards our revenue goals? Whether you call this an MQL or sales ready or marketing qualified, the name of it isn't exactly all that important. But what is important is that you have that leading indicator prior to setting a meeting or generating an opportunity or whatever. This doesn't necessarily have to come from marketing. This could be product qualified or partner qualified or what have you. But ultimately, what I like to get to is something that looks like this, where we've got all of our stages explicitly defined. What is the stage? What is the associated lead and contact status? Are there any status details that apply? For example, why did something get sent to nurture or disqualified? You may have tiers of MQLs, for example, of hand raisers versus scored MQLs. Um, but the important bit here is to explicitly define, like, from a data perspective, how does somebody enter this stage? And then you may also have like an SLA that applies at the particular stage. But we're trying to make it very clear that this is how somebody gets into each one of those stages. And that's the hardest part, right? It's often when we do these projects for clients, this is often like 70% of the time is just getting everyone in the business to agree on what these stages are and how to define them. Once you actually get to this far, the automation to actually put people in these stages is often hilariously easy compared to getting all your stakeholders to agree. But now that once you've got that, you're going to be like, okay, well, how do I measure that? So there's a few different approaches, right? You might start at the easiest point of using lead status, right? It's simple, it's out of the box, it's customizable, easy to understand, but it's only showing current state, so it isn't gonna be able to show you like how many historically did we produce. You don't get any sort of conversion metrics on that, and it also doesn't exist out of the box on contacts. So then even if you do create a version on contacts, you're still going to be left with separate reports for leads and contacts. The sort of next logical evolution from that is to say, okay, well, we'll create some lead and contact fields and we'll date stamp when somebody enters XYZ status, which is great. It's still very easy to understand. Now we can actually track the volume over time, what those conversion rates are looking like. But we're still stuck with separate reports for leads and contacts, and it doesn't support multiple cycles. You can, if you want to do, like, say, first MQL date and most recent MQL date, and then you can support up to 2 cycles. But if somebody is going through 3, 4, 5 times through the funnel, you can't really report on that because you're going to be ultimately overwriting data as they re-enter your funnel. Another way that some people will like to do this is create like an operational campaign. And then add everyone to it and use the member status to say what their lifecycle stage is. So pros of this, right, are it's single report for leads and contacts. You can still get that volume and conversion information, but again, doesn't really support multiple cycles. And honestly, this is kind of hacky because that's not what campaigns are used for. But why it's been kind of used in the past is marketers tend to historically own campaigns, and it's the one thing that they own that they can join across leads and contacts with. Sort of similar, but not exactly the same, is to track this on the campaign member. So there are a few tools out there like Full Circle Insights that do it this way, but you could also do it yourself. Where again, pros are it's a single report for leads and contacts. You get all the same metrics before. It sort of by definition includes some attribution since it lives on the campaign member. Can support multiple cycles because you can, respond to infinitely many campaigns. But it doesn't really work if the cycle doesn't start with a marketing response, whether that be sales prospecting or coming from product or what have you. The alternatives are you either kind of lose that visibility into those cycles or you have to sort of force the adding to a campaign. And I think we all know how that goes. If you ask sales to do something, you're going to get questionable adoption at best. So another option, this is a bit of a departure from the previous ones in that technically a BI tool isn't really an option in of itself. It can be used in conjunction with any of the previous options and the one I'm going to come to in a little bit. But often I see this is based on the lead and contact history tables, which are unfortunately read only. So if you make a mistake and accidentally create 400 MQLs that shouldn't have MQL'd, now you just have to remember to filter those out because there's no way to edit that table. It's just kind of there for all time. But it is extremely flexible. You can join across all the objects you may care about and get lots of fancy visualizations. But it requires often dedicated resources, and because it frequently lives outside of your operational systems, can potentially lead to distrust of the metrics. So if you're doing a lot of calculations like in the BI layer, you might often run into, oh, well, those numbers don't match my numbers, and now we're in this argument again over what it is. So my personal favorite option is to use a custom object. For the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to be talking about doing a custom object in Salesforce. The same principle could apply to Dynamics or HubSpot CRM. I haven't done this in either of those systems. I suspect you would probably need Ops Hub to do it in HubSpot. But you could do it in any other system. But for the purpose of this, I'm going to be talking about doing it in Salesforce. So why I like this is Salesforce is just sort of historically terrible at doing time series data. And by using a custom object, you can kind of stamp point in time data as leads and contacts go through each of your stages. You can support infinitely many cycles because it's a custom object. You can create relationships directly to all those objects you care about, accounts, campaigns, opportunities, supports multiple buying cycles. Got all the conversion and velocity info right there. And you can build your attribution into it as well. So getting into the mechanics of how this actually works, as you remember, when you're defining your stages, I ultimately want to spit out a table that looks like this, right? With funnel stage and associated lead and contact status. It is by definition or by design that these are two separate fields, whereas lead and contact status is intended to be user facing, where your reps are going to be interacting with that, changing the stage manually. The funnel stage or lifecycle stage or whatever you want to call it is not intended to be user facing. That is sort of system calculated or maybe the odd admin update. But that is what I like to call the one field to rule them all. It will work in conjunction with the lead and contact status. There will be a lot of overlap, but it is definitely intended to be different, as you may have multiple statuses that apply to the same funnel stage. But the funnel stage is the one that is the one field to rule them all, and that's the one we care about in terms of tracking how people are moving through our funnel. So just before we dive into this a little bit more, there are a couple of schools of thought over as to whether you create one custom object record per stage versus one record per cycle. You can do either or both. Honestly, I prefer doing one record per stage because I think it's just a little bit more flexible. It can highlight some of those non-standard paths you may see people going through of like, why did this skip from stage X to Y? Or why is this one consistently flipping back and forth between MQL and nurture? I think it makes it a little bit easier to diagnose any potential issues in your funnel process, and also in some ways makes the automation simpler. But either are acceptable, and allow you to do whatever you want. But I think you just get a little bit more flexibility by doing one record per stage. You can track point in time data more easily without having to create a million fields. But some people find that having one record per cycle is a little bit easier to digest because it's got sort of the more traditional date stamps on it that are easier to read. But up to you, your mileage may vary. So I'm going to be talking about doing one record per stage. How this would kind of work is as you come in, you've got two records, Bob and Susan. They both MQL in January. To my preferred sort of attribution method here is to use the tipping point response. So the what is the thing that caused them to start a sales cycle? Often this will be with an MQL, or maybe it'll be something product related. But the idea is that this is the thing that caused them to be ready to talk to us. So I would stamp that at this point of MQL here. But then we create a new custom object record because they're an MQL. It's got a created date of whatever. The funnel stage is MQL. As they continue to move on, they're accepted. Great. We would create a new custom object record for the SAL, and then we'd also go back and update the previous MQL record with where did they go next, when did they reach that next stage, SAL date, and so on as they continue throughout the funnel, right? And then this allows you to report on when they enter the funnel, how quickly they convert. If I'm looking for how many MQLs did we create in this time period, I'm just looking for how many custom object records are there where the funnel stage is MQL and created date is in that time period. If I want to go to how many of those then became SQLs, I'm applying again an additional filter of where the SQL date is not blank. So you can kind of start to see, why this is beneficial. I personally like to offload a lot of the heavy lifting of what funnel stage somebody belongs to the map, whether that's Marketo using, one of these operational lifecycle programs, or you could do it in HubSpot with a series of workflows as well, or you could also do it entirely within Salesforce using flows. Or you may decide to do a hybrid. Like it's okay to do a hybrid, especially if you have certain stages that have a really short SLA. Like if you have a 5-minute SLA for sales to accept a demo request, well, you would have to do that updating to SAL in Salesforce because you can't wait for that round trip to go back to the map, get that updated, and that could take 10, 15 minutes, an hour, whatever. That's too long. We need to get it there. So even if you do that kind of thing, I would still recommend that you then, if you're doing most of your processing in the map, I would recommend creating like a little skeleton campaign or workflow that says this particular transition is handled in Salesforce, just so that you can see it very obviously all in one place. When I first started doing this framework back in like 2014, we didn't have the same level of declarative tools that we have today, so it was all in Apex. But today, now that we have record triggered flows and the functionality that's available there, you do not need any code at all in order to do this. So this is a screenshot of an actual flow I have to manage this kind of process. And the real magic is in these two steps down here. Well, it's two steps in this flow. I don't know if you can see this on the presentation near the bottom, where it's updating that previous funnel stage record and creating a new one. And again, because it's a custom object record, right, you can stamp whatever you want on those records, including what that primary campaign is, again, that tipping point response, the UTMs associated with that, how many calls, emails, whatever they logged at that stage. And the reporting you get out of this is just magic. So, I start off with those very simple questions of, volume and inventory. How many XYZs did we produce in time period? Sort of where are they right now? What does my database look like from a funnel perspective? Where are they sitting? when we do this for clients, this is part of our, very basic starter pack of reporting. It's intended to be super high level, and then you can go down from there. So you probably wouldn't deliver something exactly like this, but you would definitely care about, filtering down to just MQLs, for example. How many MQLs did I produce over time? You can get that conversion and velocity. I like to think of this report as sort of like the Google Analytics report of people who enter on this page and then sort of all the branching paths they take from there. So you can see like how quickly are people moving from MQL to SAL or to disqualified or nurture or whatever. What percentage of them are moving into each of those stages? How long are they taking on average to get there? Um, and then again, going back to that tipping point response, if you're doing that with the custom object as well, then you can get reporting like this, which I kind of think of as sort of the holy grail of marketing performance, where you can see by campaign, how many MQLs, SQLs, opportunities, or whatever did I produce. And again, this is all a little bit arbitrary, so you could do more multi-touch kind of stuff if you wanted. If you are tracking UTMs, you could go that level deeper as well. But um, then this is a real dashboard from one of our clients built on, this kind of data. So the reporting is really interesting. And then especially if you combine it with SLAs, which was the topic of my presentation last year, you can go read more and listen to more about that on our blog and YouTube channel. You can get really interesting results, right? You can even load in targets so you can compare plans versus actuals, capture all the touch points at each stage to easily see like by rep, by team, what percentage of the time are we meeting our SLA. Again, supports multiple cycles because it's tied to each individual custom object record. I just like to think of this as sort of the foundation upon which more robust reporting analysis can be built. Um, and now you might be thinking to yourself, okay, that's great, but is all this really necessary? And maybe not is the answer. It's definitely not for everyone. You may get to the point where you are like, well, we don't really have that many people going through multiple cycles. Other options might be good enough for us. Date stamps might be good enough because we don't really see people going through multiple times. This is definitely got a bit of a learning curve. It's kind of a mind shift for people to think of multiple records versus having everything live on the leader contact. There's definitely some storage concerns because if you're doing one record per stage, that's at least one custom object record for every lead in contact in your database. There's definitely concerns about, who's going to maintain this automation as the business evolves. Our stages may change, our definitions may change. You need somebody who understands how the automation works and can maintain and update that. But at the same time, you may find that eventually you'll outgrow a lesser solution, and transitioning to something like this can be rather painful because once you've kind of gone down one path, when you move to a custom object, it's basically day one all over again. It's really, really difficult to backfill this kind of information because you don't know what all of the point in time values were. So it can be a bit of a resistance to change tech debt kind of thing to upgrade, if you will, if you start with a lesser solution. And also you probably will also utilize like date stamps along with a custom object, even if you do it that way, just for easier operational stuff like demonstrating it to reps. But if it were me, I would start and do this earlier rather than later, because once you've got it set up, it's not that hard to maintain. And like I said, if you start getting more advanced questions later on down the line that you aren't able to answer, that's really painful. And now you need to spend a lot more time, manually getting after that information. Whereas if you start early on with a more robust solution, then it's very easy to just say like, okay, hit report, run, and there you go. So this kind of stuff is really useful, especially if you're creating like board slides or something that have been previously manually tracking down a bunch of reports. You can just have that ready to go, hit run, and there you go. And then you can spend more time actually analyzing your data rather than just compiling all your reports together. Um, so, some tricks for success. Definitely, as I mentioned before, get your whole team involved, not just marketing. Cover all your edge cases before you get started. I also encourage you to test thoroughly, thoroughly in Sandbox before moving to production, including stress testing with bulk loads, because we're talking about uh, automation running every time records are updated. So if you have a huge list upload that results in a bunch of people changing their stage, you want to make sure you're not running into timeout issues. But at the same time, if this is new, it probably won't be perfect the first time. You'll need some iteration and someone sitting there to monitor all of your reports. Again, going back to its data, you can change it or delete it or whatever if there are mistakes made. I think that's a big advantage of this kind of framework. Um, I highly recommend creating a little reporting starter pack. So meet with all your stakeholders, talk about, what are the common questions we want to be able to answer, create reports that everybody agrees upon are the ones standardized general reports. Add some notes on your dashboard to say this is the question that this report answers, things like that. Um, and then have those starter pack reports locked down so that only certain trusted individuals can edit them. If other people want to do additional slicing and dicing, right, you can make a copy, add your other filters, and go wild. Um, I, as part of this, again, create a custom report type where we've got lookups to all of the objects we care about, and when we can bring on filters from lead, contact, account, opportunity, campaign. If you want to say only campaigns of type event, or only target accounts, or only leads that are in Australia or whatever, we have all of those filters available right away. And then I also strongly recommend a concept I call the dashboard of zero, which is basically just a bunch of reports that should always return zero results. And if it doesn't return zero results, that means that something is wrong. So some examples of things you might put on there are, MQLs that are unassigned, or records that haven't been touched for a certain amount of time, or, it's been stuck in sales working for 45 days with no activity, or there's a record that's been marked as disqualified but is also attached to an active opportunity. Things like that might highlight to you issues in your process, that whether they be technical or business process issues. It can just make it really easy as a professional to keep an eye on what's going on here. Some additional resources, a bunch of blog posts here from me on sort of the mechanics of all of this, some sample reporting inspiration for you. And then at the bottom here, this is a recording of a podcast from RevOps FM with Justin Norris and one of the CS2 folks. I came across this while I was doing my prep for this presentation, and it covers a lot of the same stuff. Definitely recommend that you go listen to that as well. Um, So yeah, thank you for giving this a watch and a listen. Again, I'm Todd Sprinkle. If you have questions, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or find me in any of the Slack communities. And good luck. Cheers.